I'm going to go ahead and share the beginning of the PowerPoint. Welcome everyone to this afternoon session from a Bible Institute, pastoring in the 21st century. Welcome. I see there's a lot of South Africa on here. I see Cord got some family in South Africa also on the call with the surname of Brown. We welcome them and some others from South Africa as well. So this afternoon, we're really going to be speaking about pastoring in the 21st century, and Cord Brown will be co-presenting along with me, and I will be co-presenting with him. So thank you for coming. So a question is, what brings you here today? Keep the chat going. So we'll be monitoring the chat as we go along, because it's in South Africa, it's a Saturday afternoon, and in the US, we're looking at it's 11 a.m. in the morning. So perhaps put a few comments in the chat to say what brings you to listen to the session in pastoring in the 21st century. I think that would be nice to know. A little bit about me. I'm one of the instructors at Amana Bible Institute, presenting from South Africa. I'm involved in two non-profit organizations, Thrive Social Development and Bottom Up Social Development, and I did a few courses in business theology and social justice. Cord Brown is in the US. He's doing PhD studies and is in training and development as well. So we'll be presenting together. So pastoring in the 21st century, what is that all about? There are a number of institutions that basically mentioned what is pastoring in the 21st century, and some lists a few of these topics. So, for example, good leadership, familiar with technology. So, if you look at good leadership or technology, what is it about technology that we interested in? Are we interested in presenting to our congregations a show on a Sunday with nice fancy lights, or is it just that we can get the message out there via mediums such as Zoom or Facebook Live, especially now that we're considering lockdowns and COVID-19, for example? And then also the pastor has to be a lifelong learner in some sense. But that doesn't really apply only to the pastor. I think for everyone, for everybody involved in ministry of sorts, has to be learning, as well as those who are in the flock. And then also the ability to maintain a balance. As we know that pastoring can be quite a challenge with having to meet the needs of everyone, plus administering and running the church as in the building, and then looking after people, as well as having your own family that you also need to care for and take care for, because that is one of your primary responsibilities. And then being effective in leading people to Christ, that's quite important. I think that is, as a Christian or a follower of Christ, that is one of our primary reasons why we pastoring or why we involved with ministries, to lead people to Christ, and then also to promote spiritual formations and the ability to change. If I think of leading change in some sense, I think 10 years back, when online church and messages wasn't really that popular, there was a question: why are we neglecting the gathering of the saints? And who knew that in 2020 we're going to have a world pandemic where that is actually the only means that we can get together and meet on platforms like Zoom or Facebook Live or YouTube, for that matter, YouTube Live. So I think Cord is going to have some things to say on some of these topics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I think that you know, you really did a great job with capturing um, exactly, what it is that we really need to be talking about, what it is that we need to be discussing in ministry in the 21st century, right now. Not only are we living kind of in postmodern times, we're living in a world that is really kind of post church. And in order for ministries and and pastoring to be effective, it looks totally different than what it looked 40 years ago, what it looked 50 years ago. Back in the day, folks just came to church because it was the cultural norm. And so it made the job of the pastor a lot easier. People came to church. You might need to meet with the pastor every so often, a couple of times a year for about 20 or 30 minutes, and that was it. And pastors preached, they preached the word, and that was primarily what they did. Now we are in a totally and completely different age and in a completely different world. So pastoring doesn't look like, spending, 15, 20 hours a week on a sermon anymore. It doesn't look that way. And sermon preparation, I should say, it doesn't look that way. Now, um, you have to really be good with technology, in terms of leadership. There are so many things now that encompasses leadership that wasn't taken into consideration before, when you're looking at church. And so now, can you be an effective leader, without being technologically savvy? What has it meant for churches, to go through like this pandemic, and if you don't have leadership who who's technologically savvy, what has the past couple of months looked like for you, and for your congregation? Um, some churches that haven't been able to really kind of grasp what, like, 21st century leadership is. Are they going to be able to survive post pandemic? Um, Especially if they were struggling pre pandemic. So there's just a lot of things in here that I think is really important. Really being able to maintain a healthy balance both professionally and spiritually. Um, and that's something that's really important, as we look at pastoring nowadays. If you look at statistics, statistics say that 50% of pastors quit in the first 3 to 5 years out of the gate. They're quitting, and a lot of it is because we go to seminary or we go to school, and we learn about theology, we learn about Greek, and we learn about Hebrew, but we have not been properly prepared a lot of times to deal with the challenges of life, that come with pastoring in today's society. It's very demanding. It's very demanding on the family. Sometimes pastors have to choose between church and family. A lot of times it feels that way. And so there's a lot. um there's a lot there, and then when you take all of that, you've got to also look at, are you effectively leading people to Christ? And if we look at a lot of our churches, especially in urban society, a lot of the folks that are here, we pastor in urban context, or even sometimes even suburban context. But when we look at where our churches are we effectively doing discipling, discipleship? Are we a missional church? And I think that that's one of the things that pastors are going to have to look at in this post pandemic, because we're going to have folks that are coming out. They have all kinds of issues and struggles. Folks are coming out of financial turmoil. Folks are, post pandemic, folks are coming out of being laid off or unemployed for 4 to 6 months. You've got people that are behind on their mortgages and different things like that. So, um, are we too churchy, or so much churchy that we are more heavily bound than earthly good, kind of thing? Have we truly been missional? Because we get to the point where um, we say we say we're missional, but really our churches are more inwardly focused. We're not in our communities a whole lot. We do Sunday service, we do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday Bible study, and a lot of the time that's it. And we'll go years and do the same thing, and we'll have one church picnic a year and we say, this is our outreach time. But that's not really being missional, And so if we look, how many souls have we actually won to Christ, or have we developed a culture in our churches as leaders that's very inwardly focused? And we're not going to grow that way. We're not going to grow churches by, passing members around. Folks leave this church and go to that church, leave that church, go to that church, and then come back to this church. If we're not in our communities, what are we doing? So these are just some of in all of that. I think you really did a great job tying it at the end. Leading spiritual formations and leading change, because change is going to come through spiritual formation, proper spiritual formation. That's going back to talking about what's the mission of our church. Are we being missional? Are we effectively leading people? Do we have a healthy balance naturally and spiritually? And it's going to start with the leaders. It's going to start with pastors. So I think that this is a really good overview. These are some of the more pertinent things that we need to be talking about and dealing with and discussing.
Thank you very much for weighing in on that. We can imagine this is quite a task for pastors. I mean, it's almost like we're expecting our pastors or leaders to be, in some sense, a superhuman, especially in the context of a smaller church gathering or a small congregation of maybe 30 to 50 people. Maybe in a larger congregation of 100 plus people where they got resources in order to employ additional staff to assist. That is maybe manageable, but we can imagine the pastor may not even have time to spend reading the Bible in all of this.
Absolutely.
So that is just something interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic, when you bring up, what it's like to and it's interesting, like, what is it like to be a shepherd in a smaller church versus being a shepherd in a larger congregation? It's totally different skill set, right? Totally different set of challenges with having 40 folks versus having 400 people. So yeah.
Then we're gonna look a little bit as a pastor, as a shepherd, and just think about perhaps what is your experience being of a pastor as a shepherd. And then I'm gonna let Cord cover this section, pastor being a prophet and a shepherd as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we talk about, what is it like for, a pastor as prophet and pastor as shepherd? One of the things that we, I think, tend to do a lot of times, one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to mystify what it means to be a prophet. We tend to kind of mystify that, right? And really, we want to kind of debunk and kind of dispel kind of the mystical parts of it, and really just kind of get down to the core of what it means for a pastor, to be a prophet. We talked about, in one of our previous sessions, we talked about what is, what is Jesus? Well, Jesus as prophet, Jesus as king, and Jesus as priest, right? But we know that Jesus never had the title of prophet. But what Jesus was he was a shepherd, and so there's a lot of correlation. There's a lot of similarities between that, being a pastor as a prophet and being a pastor as a shepherd. As we look at, what is it about a prophetic voice that we understand? First off, the prophetic voice is not mystical. And it's not all the time, flowing the spiritual gifts, the charismatic gifts, the word of knowledge, or word of wisdom, or telling folks their addresses and things of that nature. But the pure foundation, the foundation of being a prophetic voice is simply being able to speak into people's lives, right? And so the first thing, as a 21st century pastor, the first thing that's going to make pastoring effective in today's society is being able to truly speak into the lives of people, right? And that's something that sometimes we know and we understand, but we kind of miss really what that truly looks like, and going back to really, as we talk about and as we flesh out what it means to be missional, right? Being a missional church, a lot of times deals with not just discipling people to Christ, but how we disciple people to Christ, right? Pouring into people, really speaking into their lives and making a change and making a difference in their lives. The word tells us, hey, how can folks hear unless they have a preacher? And so not just preaching the word from Sunday to Sunday, but really being the voice in someone's life, right? Really being able to kind of tap into, where people are and really kind of spending time kind of helping them, right? We talk about, if we go into the Old Testament, I want to say it's Haggai. But the word kind of talks about, the prophet being, the plumb line. And when we talk about that plumb line is a person who really the plumb line represents the straight and narrow, right? The plumb line represents, if I have a plumb line, then I know which direction I'm going into, right? And so that plumb line kind of focuses and acts as kind of that balancing act, right? It keeps you on the straight line. So if I'm driving and I'm driving down the highway and I'm looking in the middle and I see the white lines are there to be a guidepost. It's there to make sure that you stay on track with the road that you're going. So you know when you need to make a turn, you know when you need to make a curve, you know when you need to go left or when you need to go right, especially when you're driving at night. And if you're like me, you drive at night, you can't see where you're going. So a lot of times I rely on the white lines as I'm driving to kind of guide me, right? And that's really the job of the shepherd. The job of the shepherd is really the job of the pastor in the 21st century now is going to be to go beyond the same preaching and teaching Sunday morning, the same Wednesday night Bible study. And it really is going to require being able to guide people and being present with people in today's society. And that's going to require strategy. That's going to require prayer. That's going to require a lot of intentionality as we seek God. How do we live out the pastorship, right? Folks that are not senior pastors, but those of you that are in ministry, those of you that have been in church for a significant amount of time, you have grown past the quote unquote baby saint years, right? How can you live out the call of shepherd, maybe not in your church setting, but maybe in your household? How do you live out being the shepherd of your household? How are you living out being a shepherd, in your community? How are you living out being a shepherd in the places that you're going, right? The folks that you see and interact with on a day-to-day basis, maybe even in your job, right? How are you living out being a shepherd? Those are the things and those are the questions that we've got to ask ourselves in the 21st century church in order to be effective, especially with this post-COVID thing. We're going to have to be very missional. We're going to have to be intentional as it pertains to how we deal with people, right? We got to be willing to, we don't want to partake in another man's sin, but at the same time, we got to be willing to get in the mud with people, right? And to help them through and to deal with their situations. So what does a prophetic voice mean? It's a life-giving word. Is being able to give a life-giving word. That prophetic voice means being encouraging, right, to your neighbor, being encouraging to the people that are under you or the folks that are following you or the folks that you are leading in some sort of a capacity. A prophetic voice comes in the form of, it could be prophetic preaching. Prophetic preaching is preaching that acknowledges fault, is preaching that quote unquote acknowledges sin, but is also preaching that gives hope, right? So we need to be preaching, but our preaching needs to be hope-giving. Our preaching is not just talking about what's wrong, but it is also laying out a pathway to get to what's right. Speaking into the lives of people, right? Speaking into the lives of people is going to be very important. as we're discussing, right? Helping people to be able to see, right? I tell folks all the time, a lot of times we talk about, what's going on in the urban church, urban society, why are our young men this way? Why are our young men that way? What's going on with our young people, our young men. And if you really pay attention to what's going on with some people, if you watch, a lot of the times our young men make bad decisions because they don't have vision. They don't have vision. If you ask a lot of them, hey, where are we going to be in 3 years? Where are they going to be in 5 years? Where do they want to be in 10 years? You ask them, a lot of the time, they don't really know. They don't have a vision mapped out for their lives. And it doesn't have to be what they're actually going to do, but it needs to be something that they have that they can grasp onto. Because when you have vision, that's what keeps you from making bad decisions. But if you watch people that don't have vision, they have nothing to lose. So they make bad decisions. And so if we take the same concept and we apply it to the church, we apply it to ministry, in order for folks to be effective, in order for pastors and leaders to be effective in the 21st century, we're going to have to give people and pour vision into people, helping folks to see vision, right, in their natural lives. And as you begin to do that, then you'll begin to see transformation in people's lives, because as they build vision, then they'll make better decisions. As we build vision, then we'll watch our communities transform. As we build vision, then we'll begin to see, like, hey, it's not that folks won't come to church. It's just that we haven't given them a reason to want to come to church, because a lot of times we spew religion, but we don't necessarily give them the hope that they need in their lives. So if they can't see anything, from what we're doing, if they can't see anything in us, if they don't see the love in us, why should I come to church? Why should I come? And so that's what we're going to see. And then, of course, acting as that plumb line. So as we're pouring vision into people and they're trying to live this thing out, we act as the plumb line. We act as the weight. We act as the scale. We help keep folks on the straight and narrow. And so that's really what pastoring is, as a prophet and as a shepherd. It is to speak life, to speak vision, to help folks see, and then to kind of help guide them into the direction that they're going into. 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. 50 years ago, folks came to church because it was a cultural norm. That's what people did. Nowadays, that's not the case anymore. Folks, people are not even going to church on Easter no more. People are not even coming to church on Christmas Eve. And, that used to be a mainstay. And we look at today's society, we don't see that anymore. Okay. So those are the things that we want to tackle into and be mindful as we move forward. Make sure that you're thinking outside of the box as you're leading, like I said, whether it's in your church, whether it's in your household, whether it's on your job. Make sure you're leading out of the box, and love on people. And that's what's going to help, to bring transformation.
If I can interject just a little bit.
Yeah.
There is a really great comment on Facebook that I want to bring out. And then I also want to kind of co-sign a lot of what you said, because there's some great stuff happening. So Miss Andrea Brown mentioned very much along the line of your reference to the need for us to be more missional. She mentioned discipling and spending time with people, walking and journeying with them as followers of Christ is so important and sadly often neglected. Really amazing comment. Can't agree more. Being missional is about more than just helping people to follow the law. And then, the law in the quotation marks can, you can definitely see my air quotes if you were face to face with me, but I always put that in air quotes, because the law is definitely something that is subjective and relative, and that needs to be made known as well. But it has to be more than just helping people to stick to the black lettering. It has to be about relating to people, touching people, getting in contact with people, journeying with people. It's about interdependence. It's not about getting people to depend on you or getting people to be solely independent. It's about interdependence and making sure that you are walking with people. And that is something that is truly neglected here. You also mentioned the plumb line. It's actually Amos chapter 7, and it's a great chapter that discusses one of the 5 visions of Amos. And you're absolutely right. In this chapter, in chapter 7, around verse 7, God is actually saying that God is setting a plumb line in the midst of Israel, of the people of Israel, and that God is not going to pass them by. Of course, in this reference, we're talking about God no longer passing them by and allowing them to treat people poorly, because Amos is a prophet of social justice, and he is concerned with how people are treating people. People are violating covenant because they're not treating people well, and Amos has a problem with that. God has a problem with that, which is why he sends his peripheral prophet Amos. Nonetheless, God is no longer passing by their unjust action, and God is setting the plumb line. You're absolutely right, Professor Cord. Like, we have to be that plumb line. That plumb line. We have to be the people that God uses as the standard. And I think it goes hand in hand with what you're saying about being missional, and also with Miss Andrea Brown's comment. And one really amazing thing that you also said, lastly, I promise this is done. You mentioned that that we all have a shepherding role. You kind of suggested that as well when you mentioned, you know, these seasoned Christians, these Christians who are no longer the baby Christians. You know, it is very true. We all have a shepherding role, and it's really important for us to understand that this webinar isn't just for pastors. It's for each and every one of us, because, you know, in one way or another, we are all given the duty and the responsibility of pastoring someone else, whether it is in our household, pastoring our children, or whether it is as a, you know, a school teacher, pastoring the students that we are teaching, or whether it's in this type of medium right here as instructors for ABI, you know, making sure that we have in one way or another a responsibility of being a standard and setting a standard for students who come into our webinars or our courses. We all have a shepherding role, and it's really important for us to figure out how we're meant to sit in that position and just live into it, you know, and live into it in very much the ways that you've mentioned here in this webinar. So thank you so much for those comments, both Professor Basaji and Professor Brown. Thanks.
Thank you
And
so
also
much.
Andrea Brown, great comment. Thank you.
If we look at the shepherding role, we kind of realize that there is quite a serious role that the pastor has, or for that matter, really anybody else. Because the shepherd actually laid down his life for his sheep. So when the wolf is coming to attack, he's the one that fends for that sheep. And that is quite a serious matter. And we need to actually take that into consideration as we leading people. But maybe in this context, we're talking about the pastor, but really in everything, for everybody that we're looking out for, we need to take that into consideration. Are we actually prepared to lay our lives down for another? And then on the backdrop of shepherding, we come to the pastor as a mentor, and we ask the question, who has actually been mentored, and how has that actually taken place? I mean, once again, we could add some comments in the chat, and thank you, Latoya, for picking up on those comments in the chat, because all that I'm seeing on my screen is a PowerPoint presentation. So the pastor is a mentor. So what is a mentor? A mentor is really a counselor or someone that has experience, that is looking out or advising someone else over a period of time. Yes, we say that Jesus mentored his disciples or shepherded his disciples over a period of 3 years. But if Jesus didn't pass away, I'm sure that mentorship role would have continued for a longer period of time, other than just 3 years. So what was the message of Jesus? Jesus referred to his disciples, or his message was, go into the world and make disciples of all nations. And making disciples goes quite deep, in the sense that once someone get saved or they accept Christ as their Savior, we can't just leave the person there. We have to shepherd them, or in this context, mentor them. So that involves, if you look at the methods, we need to be accessible. We need to be accessible as the pastor or the leader, the ministry leader, the mother, the father, the parent, or the grandmother, for that example, or the grandfather. We need to be accessible. And then he cared for us regardless of who we are, what we involved with, what is our religious backgrounds, our sexual orientation. Jesus loved us unconditionally, regardless of where we find ourselves. In the same way, we need to kind of do the same. And then he also taught, and he taught his disciples, and he taught his disciples by modeling a life that is above reproach. He modeled how doing miracles, healing people. He taught the disciples so that the disciples is ready to go out and do likewise once Jesus basically leaves the earth. If I kind of backtrack to the message, what are we doing to teach? How are we going about doing that? For example, this method that we're doing right now via Zoom, we kind of teaching people and informing people of the role as a shepherd, the role as a mentor, and what is happening in pastoring in the 21st century. And then some of the techniques, now that we possibly in a post-COVID situation or currently still in a COVID-19 situation, some of the techniques we can't possibly meet. So Zoom is a way that we can continue mentoring, building relationship with people, fixing that relationship that is strained, phoning that person that, oh, it's difficult to speak. I haven't spoken to a person for a year. Let's take the time to fix that relationship so that that our witness carries on and that we can lead a better life and that it doesn't hold us back in some sense. And then some of the characteristics of of Jesus or the lifestyle that he led, we can do the same. It's not that difficult to live a life above reproach, to do things that model Christ. Yes, we do have challenges. We are human beings, but still we can strive to be like Christ on a daily basis.
Mm.
And then when I come to Jesus,
Hey, Cam-
speaking about again about,
hey, Cameron,
does
can
somebody
you?
want to say something?
Yeah, Cameron, can you go back just 1 minute? Cause I had this burning in me, and so I just wanted to just kind of plug this in, if it's okay. I don't mean to jump in,
Sure.
but oh my
No,
God,
no.
you said something. You said a couple of good things, but you said one thing that I think is so pertinent in the 21st century, because you mentioned, you said that if Jesus had not passed away, then his mentorship with his disciples would have gone on way longer than what it did. And I think that that's very critical in 21st century church, because the reality of it is that the reason why a lot of churches are not growing is because pastors are burning themselves out. And pastors are burning themselves out because the pastors don't want to mentor people. Leaders don't want to mentor or train leaders. And that's the problem. We get what we have, right? We get what we have. And oh God, I don't mean to go off. I don't mean to go off, but this was burning. I gotta, because we get what we have, and then we want to hoard it like it's for us. It's for our own glory. I'm the pastor here and not nobody else. And you ain't I ain't gonna let you, I might let you, preach once a year, but this is my house. And this is what we
Sure.
do. And the problem, and this becomes a problem, this becomes an issue, because now when something happens to that leader, that church dies, you know, or we raise up folks that we want to call our sons and daughters, but they're ineffective. And they're ineffective because we are not really willing to pass the baton. I'm really only willing to do as much for you as it benefits me. So if it doesn't benefit, if what I'm doing for you doesn't directly benefit me, then I'm not doing it, or I'm not interested in it. And so it's anti-kingdom. And so as we think through even pastor as mentor, You know, Christ gave his disciples pretty much everything that he had. He gave them all of the tools that was necessary that they needed to succeed. And I think, you know, in today's society, we're missing that in a lot of 21st century churches. And so as a result, we're going to start seeing those churches go on decline. We're going to start seeing, you ever seen a church and they start having growth, and they go from 30 people to 60 people, from 60 people to 120, but they never get past that 120? That's because the pastor still wants to wield the same level of control in the 120 as he did in the 30. In the 30, he could be a solo pastor, do whatever he wanted. But when you get to the 120, you got to start training folks up. You got to start mentoring people. And when leaders don't mentor people, they burn themselves out. The church becomes a reflection of only who they are, and they only attract a certain type of people, and eventually they die off because they don't have what they need to survive. So I'm sorry. I had to go on the tangent. Go ahead, proceed. I apologize.
I have a few Facebook comments, actually, if you don't mind me interjecting once more.
Sure.
They're really great comments. I promise it's worth the interjection. So we have Miss Andrea Brown. She said that she often think of that. What does discipleship look like practically in this time that we're living in? I know Zoom and phone calls, and I'll just add a but ... you know? So maybe you guys can speak to what discipleship should look like for 21st century pastors in a pandemic, you know, at a time where we can't actually physically, you know, make contact with people, or you know, there's, you know, some injunctions against that. We have Jillian, who said, pastors protecting their kingdoms sometimes and don't want to mentor. It's sad when they can mentor others. Definitely agree. Totally agree. And this is one of the issues that seems to be apparent even in biblical times. We have, you know, texts that suggest that this is not new, right? What does Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, have to do? Come on in and tell him, you're doing this wrong. Like, get you some leaders. And then later on, we get Paul having to, you know, reinforce that the body of Christ is meant to function like a system, very much like a human body, every body part having their part. And in order for body parts to actually effectively live into their function, they have to be trained and mentored. So yeah, and we have Miss Andrea Brown once again. She said, regarding your comment about burnt out pastors, that's so true. Burnout cause hoarding of the knowledge and skills, not training up and discipling and imparting to those we need to disciple. Yeah, you know, very, very true. And I think all of these comments are just really reinforcing your very valid, burning comment, Cord. So thanks for that.
All right, amen. Well, I know
If I
there was a
can
couple of
perhaps
things.
speak,
Go ahead, Cameron. You go first.
if I can perhaps speak to the first question about tools and going about mentoring per se, I have to give an example and also an acknowledgement to someone that's common to both of us, Cord, is Dr. Gabe Viers. I mean, if I think he's out in California, and we've spent I can't even count, probably easily 20 hours a week, either if it's not on Messenger, if it's not via video chat or calls. And in some sense, I refer to him as my mentor. Yes, he's in a very similar age bracket to what I am, but he was one of my professors when I did one of the courses in the US. But what he modeled to me was that go out and build relationships with people. So when I go on to, for example, a messenger and I'm meeting someone or connecting with a family member, just ask the question, how are you doing? How has your week been? what has been keeping you keeping you busy over this time? What's God showing you to do? And then start build that relationship, even if it's once a week for 1 minute. Ask that question and create dialogue, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. And what we will find that people is actually willing to talk because people is looking out for relationship. They're looking for people to actually connect with and resonate with what they are. But what I found that in my experience of church, it comes down really down to the sermon, a little bit the music, and that's kind of it. We're not really building relationship with people. We're saying yes, we're fellowshipping with one another when we meet on a Sunday, pre-corona, we're fellowshipping with one another. But in some sense, COVID-19 may have just brought about something new where we're actually dialoguing with one another and we actually forced to build relationships with one another. And now we can go even one step further. Us being on the Zoom call, we actually proximate to one another. Although we're thousands of kilometers away, we actually proximate. I mean, just myself and you, for example, we've shared some stuff over social media, but I mean, it's the dialogue between the two of us and we building a relationship. So, so that is perhaps a new way, or perhaps that is the change that we need to lead going forward. Because like you mentioned as well earlier on, that we're moving into a post-church society where people actually don't go to church. But things like shepherding and mentoring, that can still continue. We're still building relationships. We're still making disciples of all nations, but it doesn't look the same. There may be a difficulty in terms of the pastor and the church setup, but we need to model that in both ways, both within the church institution structure and those that is heading towards a post-church society. I think that is kind of important. It can be done. It's possible. I've seen it done over the last couple of months, and it's been really great to see that happen. Just personally, myself, I've built so much new relationships with people in the US and other parts of the world during this lockdown period, and it's been really amazing to share with people, to hear what are their struggles during this time. Um, so yes, this is it's quite. I think we kind of going to be on the cutting edge of meeting people. We're breaking down all barriers in some sense.
Yeah,
I don't
if
know
I
if
can
you have
add to
any.
that, I totally agree with what you're saying. One of the things that I've come to realize personally is, a lot of us see COVID as some kind of demonic attack or something like that. Oh, it's the devil, it's Hasatan, Satan in the Hebrew Bible. No, it's not Hasatan, it's God. It's God's agents at work, working to preserve creation, working to help us pick up the pieces that we dropped, along the way. We've gotten to a place where we are literally about to work towards the extinction of the earth. And that includes human and animal life because we have been, you know, we have produced action that is so detrimental to its health and to our health. And the church has a huge role in that. We're just as culpable because we've limited our role and function as people of God to things that we do in a building. You don't, and I'm more so thinking of this for the people who hear post church society and cringe, like, oh my gosh, that can't exist. Actually, it can. Pastoring and um doing whatever you believe you're called to do, whether it's in being, I don't know, some kind of prophetic voice or evangelist or, some kind of missionary work or apostleship. It doesn't have to happen in a building. And in fact, if you feel like it does, it's probably because you're not groomed enough to do it. You know, people who are actually existing well in these roles, they do it before they even get a title. It's something that they live into without a building. And that needs to be something that we're emphasizing in this time. So we need to start seeing this pandemic as something that is very much along the lines of what Professor Cameron is saying, that is helping us build relationships, helping us to actually live into what fellowship should look like. You know, we've been going to church with people for X amount of years and we don't even know the intricacies of their life, or their lives. But COVID has opened up a door for us to actually lend a helping hand to people that we weren't helping before, hear the voices of people that we refused to hear before, and make time to actually check in on people, to dialogue, to be human, and to really love being human. And in addition to all of that, it's forcing church leadership to rethink what it means to actually exist as an effective body of Christ, as an effective light in the world. And that's really important. COVID, in so many ways, and not just COVID, but many other things that are happening in this society, is answered prayer for us. It is very much answered prayer. We're going to find leadership that is inadequate, moving out of the way, adequate leadership rising up, and we're going to engage in relationships like never before and be a bigger and better people. We're already seeing the earth healing as a result of us caring enough to stay in our homes. So there's a lot of good stuff happening here, and a lot of it is happening right here in this arena that we're talking about today in our role as pastors or shepherds of others.
Thank you very much.
Oh, there's one more comment, if I can interject once more. Miss Andrea Brown said, like God is unleashing the church. The church is not about meeting in the building, but going out and reaching out, practically being love and loving and caring for others. Totally agree. Could not have said it better.
For the sake of time, I'm gonna combine this slide and the next one because it's kind of related. So we know that Jesus was accessible, and we know that he loved and that he people and that he taught people. As these are just three characteristics that Jesus did. So now, if I look at what we can do, we need to be accessible despite these lockdowns, despite being busy, because often our busyness can limit us or limit someone else's access to us. And that is not necessarily what Jesus did. Yes, Jesus got tired and he rested and he continued, but he was accessible. Looking these days, often it is pastors are inaccessible to their congregations, or they have some of them may have even a security detail around them that you cannot get to them. But the main thing is, let us be accessible to those we're leading or mentoring. And that is even in the case of, I think, especially of the US and how the protest action in the US is actually filtering through to the rest of the world. Let's be accessible to all, regardless of what is happening at the moment. And then let's love. Jesus loved his disciples until the very end. Let us love one another regardless of what they are or who they are. Don't condemn one another. Often, I think of the current protests in the US and around the world. Sometimes we're quick to condemn as Christians. We rather condemn instead of listen and hear what is actually taking place and the reasons behind why they are protest action. I mean, if I take South Africa, for example, when we speak out about social justice issues, then it's very quick that it's turned around and says, your voice is not palatable for the church. Let us love regardless. Let us listen and let us hear what people has to say. And then let us teach. Let us teach our children. Let us teach our mentees or our proteges and those in our congregation to lead a lifestyle that resembles Christ. And let us not only do that in theory, but let us model that as well. Like I said earlier, sometimes it can be difficult, but it's a work in process. And then what do we feel God is calling us to do? And let us feel that if He's calling us to meet people via social media, to disciple people, to mentor others, let us do that, and let us take cognizance of the fact that there are many people out there crying for a mentor, looking and seeking out mentors. Often the popular names out there are difficult to reach because of accessibility issues. But we can mentor those around us. I can mentor my daughter and guide her along the way. So what is God calling you to do today? I don't know if anybody else has any comments before I go into the next slide or the following one.
Yeah, I just want to quickly mention, so Pastor Nick said this into our group chat, and I think it's worth kind of mentioning so that everybody on Facebook Live can hear it. But he said, I agree that there's more synergy in the church than before, where love is being shared all over the world. It is time for church leaders to have to rethink how post-COVID church has to move into love and unity. Just phenomenal, just absolutely phenomenal. A phenomenal comment, and I think that that's one of the things that I think could be a strategy from the Holy Spirit, is to really, this kind of forces us, and Cameron, you had kind of mentioned it before, but this whole thing forces us to really be present with people. It forces us to actually do real pastoral work. It forces us to forget about the glamour of pastoring and all of that kind of stuff, and to really just kind of focus on shepherding people. Back in the day, shepherding was a dirty job. Shepherding was not a clean job. It was a dirty job. It was not glamorous. It was very humble. You was in the field with the sheep, cleaning up sheep dung and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't, it just wasn't what it is. And so now I think the really this whole thing is forcing people to be present with people. Like my staff, like I'm in the middle of planning a church, and my staff, what we do, it's like every other week, pre-pandemic, like at least once every 2 weeks minimum, I got together with my team, and we just kind of sat together and we broke bread and we spent time together, and I got a chance to pour into them and we poured into each other, and I think that this is what, Pastor Nick is kind of talking about. And so, God, I think, is just really moving us back into that place where we're actually doing mentoring and pouring into people and actually doing shepherding. So yeah.
Absolutely. For the next slide, is this going to take place, Scott?
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure how much we have after this, but I just kind of wanted to culminate this. I have a good buddy of mine who is here. He is on the line already, and so I'm so excited to have him. Pastor Brandon Wright. He is a millennial pastor, and he is in a he has a very unique situation coming from his previous context of pastoring to his new context of pastoring. And so I just kind of want to talk to him a bit. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions. And I think that this stuff is really, really relevant to 21st century pastoring. And we'll dive into it for about 5 to 10 minutes. And the more we dive into it, I think the more you guys will get out of it. And so just want to welcome Pastor Brandon Wright. He's the lead pastor of First Christian Church of Cleburne, Texas, down there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I want to welcome him on the line. Pastor Brandon, how are you today, sir? Unmute your phone. Unmute your phone.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little old with technology, so forgive me.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Welcome to ABI's pastoral 21st century pastoral pastoring in the 21st century webinar. I want to just kind of want you to just kind of introduce yourself, and we're going to jump right into a few questions that I have as it pertains to what we're talking about now. I think that you can really give some good insight as someone who is literally leading during this time in this season. So just introduce yourself, a little bit of background, and we're going to jump right in.
All right. I think you told a lot about me already, but I'll try to add different. New to Texas, I received a call from our denomination that there was an opening out in Texas. So we packed up and went across the country to serve from Detroit originally. And we've been here for about 9 months, just trying to do the Lord's work. In Detroit, I served on a staff, and now I am a solo pastor. So we are definitely praying God's strength as we kind of make these transitions to a total different culture and a total different context. I don't know if we've talked about it before, but I know that in Detroit, I was in a predominantly African-American context. And now here in Texas, I am the black guy, the fish out of water, if you want to say. I serve an all-white congregation as an African-American with a Pentecostal upbringing. So this is a very different context, but I believe that, God makes no mistakes, and we're just being led by his spirit to impact his people for the gospel message.
Gotcha. Absolutely. One of the things that, I wanted to get into earlier, but I decided that I would save it, is really kind of talking about, so we're still dealing with 21st century pastoring. And one of the things that was kind of burning in me earlier was really just this big difference between not just the cultural considerations, but when you look at where your context is now, you're a solo pastor. And for those of you guys who, obviously solo pastoring just means that he is the only ministerial voice in his church whatsoever. Okay, so he does everything. Versus coming from a church, and we actually at this church, we served on the same staff together for a bit. So I know the context, probably 2 to 3 times the amount of people than the current context. So transitioning to a smaller congregation versus a congregation that's somewhat larger. Talk to us about the challenges, right? Because you can speak to what the challenges are to pastoring a mid-sized church versus a smaller church. Like, what have you seen as the differences? What are the challenges that you're facing now that's totally different, pros and cons? Kind of speak to that.
I think one of the challenges initially going into a solo context is realizing that the brunt of the work kind of falls on you. And pastoring, that's the context in general, that the shoulders, the rise and success of ministry is kind of on your shoulders. But when you have staff and different ministry leads and different ministry heads that will help you function in ministry, it makes your burden a little lighter. Whereas when you go into a solo context, you are the individual that's really trying to forecast vision. And not only are you trying to forecast vision, you're trying to bring the vision to life. And that's difficult, right? Because you are the person that's forecasting the vision. And now you are the arms, the legs, and the extension of trying to make that vision come to fruition, which can be kind of difficult because you don't have the assistance there to make those things kind of happen. One of the things that is different in my context is I'm a millennial pastor in a baby boomer and older kind of congregation. So everyone in my congregation is 75 plus. So the ingenuity that one needs, the strength, the vitality that an individual needs as a millennial pastor to carry out the vision, it could be limited simply because of the context of the members that I pastor. So being in this solo kind of context becomes even more difficult because now there aren't really people who don't have the energy to really just kind of catch up. And it is what it is, right? We pray to God, we ask God for the strength, the vitality, the fervor to complete the mission. But it's still have to bring it to practical, ministry, that sometimes you just don't have the people to do what needs to be done. So I think that's really one of the biggest pros and the cons of it. And then one of my personal cons is that I am a millennial pastor, and I feel as if I'm really not a millennial. I don't really understand technology too much. I'm not really good at trying to figure out and maneuver through spreadsheets and trying to do Zoom calls and connect all these different people. It's just a lot goes on, So me actually having to be stretched and grow in this area is an area that is as foreign to me, but it's teaching me some things. Now I have to do these things if I want to exist in this post kind of pandemic world. And I believe this pandemic has really made churches kind of think about their processes and ensure if these processes are effective for 21st century ministry. And I would say that in this time, I believe someone stated earlier that it's a time for me to say this works or this doesn't. And if it doesn't work, how can I try to revise it to ensure that effective ministry will take place? Because just because I don't revise it, that means eventually ministries will die because we have not revised how we can be effective and instrumental in kind of pushing forth the ministry that Jesus promised us if we don't look at, our current processes and policies. So that's me as a new pastor. So I'm in a very interesting place. I'm a new pastor overall, a new pastor in a different cultural context, and a new pastor in a pandemic. So pray my strength.
Yes, sir.
Pray my strength. There's a lot of news here that we're just trying to juggle and maneuver at this time.
Man, you digged into so much. You just kind of dug right into where I wanted to go. Man, so I got a couple questions, and we're not going to hold you too long, but I got a couple of questions for you. So first off, with that being said, you mentioned that, now it's like, hey, I got to up my technology. And I think that kind of speaks to the differences, right? When you're in a larger context and you got multiple staff, because we were on the same church together, I used to just get up. I just get up and preach. When it's my turn, okay, it's time for me to get up. I gotta lead because we have folks in the background that did the background work. And now, you're a solo pastor and I'm planting a church from the ground up. It's like, now you got to do everything. So the skill set that got you to this place, it's there, but now it's like you got to develop new skills and you got to continue to press and push forward. And that sometimes is very difficult to do. So let me ask you these two questions. First question I want to ask you is, in the middle of this whole thing, question number one, how are you taking care of yourself? Because you are busy, and I know your life. See, I knew you before you became pastor, okay, lead pastor. So how are you taking care of yourself? How are you making sure? Because in the first 5 years, 50% of pastors quit or retire or they move on to something else. So how are you actively combating that? First question. And the second question would be, what do you have to say to the people that are here on the line, right, on Zoom, and the folks that are watching via Facebook Live? How should they be lightening the load or helping their pastor? So you know what I mean? Because I know you can speak to both of those things. We've talked. So come on, lay it on us, Rev. What's 21st century pastor? Come on here.
Okay. I think one of the foundational things that I try to do for self-care, because going into ministry and especially studying in seminary, self-care was something that at least practical ministry did not teach you. We hear all the time, oh, take care of yourself, but people really never made it practical as to these are the ways that you can employ self-care to ensure that you won't burn out doing God's work. And it's real to say that people do burn out because you have a vision, but reality oftentimes does not match up or align to your vision. So you become a little discouraged and burned out because you're trying to make things happen, but yet and still you're looking at reality. So for me, I just try to always go back to the things that bring me joy and bring me pleasure. So napping is one of the things that, of course, bring me pleasure, right? So what I try to do is once a week, I really shut down. I try not to take any calls. I let the people know that unless it's emergencies, this is my day that, I am taking for my own solace, for my own peace of mind. And on that day is the day that I'm literally just realigning myself with my own passions, the things that make me happy, the things that I can, just relax and just go somewhere. If I want to take a drive, if I want to take a little weekend trip, whatever I want to do, I do those things so that I can just kind of reconnect with myself. And I think that's important, just taking time to reconnect with myself, because when I'm reconnecting with myself, now I'm hearing clearly the direction that God wants me to go. But when my world is so busy, and I'm really kind of running on fumes, I'm not really getting the direction that I need, or I'm getting the direction, but it's clouded because there's so many other things that are present. So I'm literally, again, just trying to make sure that I'm connecting with myself and really just knowing who I am and knowing the things that, bring me the ultimate kind of pleasure in life.
Got you.
Number two, my favorite question, what can people do to help lighten the load and help their pastors? One of the things that I really enjoyed over the course of the last 2 weeks from my members of my church, they have been calling and saying, hey, Pastor, what is it that we can do? What's going on? We see a lot's going on because, like I said before, I serve an all-white congregation. So they are pretty aware of what's taking place in our country right now, and as a Black man, I'm a little, I'm hurt over what's happening in our world, and for my congregation to come to me and say, we understand that you're hurt. We hurt with you. What can we do to lighten this load? What can we do to make your job easier? Is there anything that we can do to bring a vision to pass? Or, can we respond to this? Or do we need to have a meeting with people so that you can relax or, or rest or whatever it is? And I think people actually jumping into ministry really helps lighten the load of a pastor. I believe that the body of Christ has a various amounts of gifts that they house. And sometimes people can fall into a few categories. They can either fall into the category of, I'm going to volunteer, or the other category is, I'm going to wait until I'm asked to volunteer. And I believe a lot of the church falls into that latter category. So I'm going to wait until somebody asks me to do something versus me volunteering because I have a gift and I see that there's a need.
Ooh, you jumping into
and I
it.
believe that we as people of faith have to say, I see there's a need, and what can I do to help meet that need? And if I can't meet that need, let me tap on the other resources in the congregation, and let's get together and see how we can meet that need collectively. Because individually, I may not be able to meet that need, but if I know Sister Karen and Sister Shaniqua over there can meet the need, then let me go talk to them instead of just waiting for the pastor to try to initiate the change. And although the pastor is responsible to guide the ship, there are people on the ship. And I think one of the things that people, and if I'm doing too much, let me know. But one of the things that I believe people expect is that they expect their pastors to be experienced in every area. Well, pastor can do it. They can do that. They can do it. But the truth is, we are not experienced and gifted to function in every area. Like, we have a broad assignment, right? We have to oversee everything. But there are specializations that the body of Christ has, and we have to start tapping into those specializations, i.e. our spiritual gifts, to ensure that the church will exist and be sustainable for future ministry. So if you want to help your pastor prevent from being burnt out or being stressed, like, volunteer your time before ask, volunteer your resources before ask the Spirit of God to help you to identify with the need in the church so that you can meet the need without the need ever being voiced. Because that's good to me. If you can meet the need without the need ever being voiced, that shows me that the Spirit of Christ is existing in you, because I'm communicating to God a need. Now the Spirit of Christ is communicating to you a need, and now you're communicating the need back to me. So,
ooh, Reverend, you done jumped all the way.
I apologize. I didn't mean to do all this.
Oh, no, this is good. This is good. Listen, we're going to cut this part of the session, and this is going to be separate. We're going to charge people $20 for this video. Oh, Lord. Any comments, any Facebook comments before I move to my next question? Any Facebook comments?
Yeah, so Miss Andrea Brown said, so true. The King volunteers and those waiting to be asked, we call them pew warmers. Funny. Uh, and Miss Jillian said, meet the need before it even being voiced. Pastor Brandon, that is the fire. Yes. So great comments there. And yeah, totally agree. You know, sadly, I have to say that most recently, because I spent a few years de-churched, actually. I was still super saved. I just wasn't doing the whole physical church thing for almost 6 years. I'm kind of guilty of being in that latter category now. Before, when I was born and raised in the church, I've been doing it all my life. I was in that first category where, you know, you have a need, let me satisfy it. I got really burnt out really fast as a millennial, and going back, it's just been like, sure, if you ask me, I'm gonna do it. Just ask me. I ain't volunteering for that. So, you know, I have to kind of check my heart in that whole area, because I'm a very giving person, and my giving can certainly lead to me having 10,000 things that's already on my plate and me adding 10,000 more because I see needs. So I got to work on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't see any other Facebook comments, but I'll interject should I.
Okay.
Gotcha. Well, Reverend, I think I'm gonna make this the last set of questions that I'm gonna ask you. I think that we've had a phenomenal session, but just to end this thing out, first question is going to be, so we spoke earlier to Pastor, and you and I even talked about this a little bit on yesterday evening, but we talked about Pastor as prophet and shepherd on one hand, but then on the second hand, we also talked about Pastor as mentor. How are you living into that in such a different context? Like, how are you living into being pastor as prophet and shepherd, speaking into the lives of the people, but then also being pastor as mentor? Second question would be, with that being said, in the way that you're living into that, how are the needs? How have you seen the needs of your congregation change because of the pandemic, or do you anticipate a great change, or what is your strategy going forward from now?
All right. Those are two very different questions, but I'll try to answer those questions. For the first question, I believe that at least from my context, I grew up in an apostolic persuasion. So our definition of pastor as prophet is different than maybe an AME or a Methodist or a Lutheran's definition of pastor as prophet. But I believe, for the sake of this conversation, that the pastor as prophet is really a voice that's necessary for a particular change that's trying to happen for our churches. So I believe that each pastor is prophetic in his own literature, because a prophet is really foretelling of what God is really speaking, right? And I believe that if a pastor as a prophet is helping people to live up to what God is speaking, then they're being prophetic in their witness. And they're being prophetic in their delivery, and they're being prophetic in their message. And I believe if we lose the prophetic voice in preaching, then we're in a dangerous place, because the prophetic voice is to help us to navigate and maneuver to where God is trying to take us as a people of faith, whether it's individually or collectively. And I think sometimes a lot of people view prophet, a pastor being prophetic as, I got a personal word for you. Let me come here and shana na 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 and give you this word. And while I believe that has a particular place in the body of Christ, even if a pastor never says, I have a personal word for you, he should be prophetic. He or she should be prophetic and speaking to what God is trying to do and the change that God is trying to make, and the places that God wants to take the body of Christ at that particular time. And I believe that in this season, it's definitely a time for prophetic preaching, because we are experiencing great turmoil in our land, and we need people of faith that's going to help, our congregations see what God's voice is at this time. And I think that's so key, that we really know what God is trying to speak to us at this time. And I believe, like someone stated earlier, that, you know, the pandemic is not, oh, Satan has been unleashed into the world to do X, Y, and Z. No, this is a time for us to realign with our purposes and realign with what God is trying to speak, and make sure that we're on the same page as God as we begin to culminate into those end times. You know, this is the time where we need prophetic preaching that's going to help us to really understand God's voice as we are nearing the end times. And if we don't have that voice, then people just won't be prepared, you know, for what's coming. And we need to prepare our people for what's coming and how to live in the here and now. And that prophetic voice is very needed. And then as a mentor, you know, a pastor as a mentor, I believe that, of course, like each and every one of us, whether we have the title of pastor or we operate in a different role, if we're pastors to different people, we should always mentor people to grow and develop and mature in their faith and make it practical. You know, it shouldn't be, okay, I'm gonna take you under my wing so that you can preach or so that you can teach. But no, I'm taking you under my wing so that your entire life will be better. You know, at the end of the day, we want people to advance and excel in every part of their life, not just their spiritual walk, you know, not just their, you know, their church attendance and their church giftings. No, I want you to excel in your personal finances. I want you to excel in your relationship with your spouses and your children. I want you to excel in your job. Like, I want every part of your life to excel. And we need people that will mentor people to help them be the best versions of themselves. And what better call than a pastor to help people do those things? Right. You know, a pastor should not just only preach, you know, spiritual truths, but we should help people be practical in every area of their lives. Like, if me preaching spiritual does not help you to advance in your personal walk and your personal life, then maybe I need to reevaluate what it is that I'm teaching. Because when we have an encounter with God, we should be better in every area of our lives. So once I hear the word of God, that should make me want to really be in a place where I'm operating at my optimal potential and not just at a low level. And that's in every single area of our lives. Okay. Second question. Remind me, because I get a little excited sometimes.
Do you anticipate, so based on, you know, like speaking into the lives of your people, based on mentorship, things of that nature, right? Pastor as prophet, pastor as mentor, pastor as shepherd. Do you anticipate there being a shift or a change, or are you seeing a shift and a change the way you are going about doing those things because of pandemic?
Yeah, I believe definitely there is a shift and a change that has occurred, and not just in my congregations, but congregations alike. Like I said before, like, we are definitely reevaluating what it is that we call church. You know, one of the things that I have been preaching and talking to a few of the individuals that I have at the church that operate in maybe some staff areas, but not really ministerial areas, is that we may not be able to do church as we always have done it. You know, we may have to cancel all of our contact that are outside of worship services for some time being. I said, so what do we do in those times to ensure that personal touch is being made? You know, because people come to church for that personal touch, right? That we grow in communion and fellowship with one another, as well as get the personal knowledge and the spiritual growth and maturation that we receive from the preached word. So how do we try to combat those feelings of loneliness during these times? So I believe that's something that we as our churches are talking about, is how can we meet that personal need of the individual while still trying to maneuver through all of the changes that are rapidly happening. You know, and the one thing that I've noticed is that today we can make a decision, and then tomorrow we have to make a different one, because that's just how fast the world is changing. And I believe that if we as the body of Christ can be open to the changing dynamics in our world, then we'll be more successful, you know, because if we're only one track mind and say, well, this is the way we got to do it, well, we have failed, and we may or may not be sustainable for very much longer, simply because the world is changing at such a rapid pace. You know, one day the CDC says this, the next day they reverse it and say this, you know, so we got to ensure that we are being flexible in our teaching and our instruction to our people, especially when it comes to practical knowledge. So I believe our churches, at least my church, has made some small kind of advances. The one thing, and you know, I gotta brag on this part, the one thing I love about my congregation is that because we're older, there are not a lot of changing dynamics that are happening rapidly, right? Because we're older, so we're a little bit more secure in certain areas. You know, I don't have to worry about things changing and when it comes to giving and stuff like that, because things are stable in certain areas. Whereas another church that has, you know, more millennials or Gen X's in their congregation may have to worry about certain other things. So for me, you know, we're making some changes, making some strides, and just really following the moving of the Spirit as we try to direct, you know, our church programming, you know, in the days to come.
Gotcha. Make sure you leave all your booking information. We're gonna have to post that. Oh man, but man, God, thank you so much for all of your knowledge. I think Cameron and Latoya is gonna close it out. But any questions for Pastor Wright before we move on? All right, it is in your hands, Dr. Cameron.
Not talk to you. Thank you very much, Brandon, for the time that you spent with us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. Just from my side now, just some additional resources on mentorship and pastoring in the 21st century. There's the Alban Center at Duke University. There's Dr. Gabe and Dr. Karina Vias, some of the articles that they've written, and the University of New Mexico, the Mentorship Institute. And then, of course, ABI. That is where you can find some additional resources on mentorship, pastoring in the 21st century, and loads of other things. And I think I can give over to Latoya right now. Professor Dr. Latoya.
Yes. So thank you so much. This was amazing. I just want to go ahead and share my screen really briefly so that I can go through some of what we're offering here at ABI. We are growing as an institution. We're growing in our staff, and you've heard the voices of two of our instructional team members. We have a great staff, and I'm really excited about you guys hearing the voices of our other instructional team members this month in our free webinar series. So this month we're focusing on fivefold ministry. I call it the fivefold ministry clinic. This is not, as you see from today, it's not an exhaustive course on these various offices in the fivefold, but what it is these webinars are really just giving you a sneak peek of several different aspects of and really practical aspects of these offices and how we are all purposed to, in one way or another, live into some of these smaller aspects of them, and then thinking about them in today's society. So on Thursday, we started off with somewhat of an aside where we talked about biblical prophecy. I gave some really interesting tools that you need to know in order to understand biblical prophecy. And then we thought about how biblical prophecy, particularly in the Old Testament and maybe one or two references in the New Testament, actually can help us to live into or to adjust to our current circumstances. On Monday, we're going to move on to evangelism in the digital age, taught by Professor El Michelle, who is really, she's like our social media instructor. She is really great at helping people to understand that they need to bring their whole selves to their media marketing. So if you have a business or a ministry, or you're just trying to brand yourself, she's a great person to listen to. She's going to be co-leading our evangelism in the digital age with Onika Stewart, an instructor in New Testament, director of biblical studies. And then we're going to move on to a lecture or discussion on prophets, the office, and the potential, and just so much more related to prophets. I'm going to go ahead and teach that one. We'll have one on the 22nd. This is a Monday at 7 p.m. on teachers. Once again, the office, the need, and best practices, taught by one of our professors that actually is a book coach. She's going to be teaching some fall courses on how to get those books written in a small period of time, and co-teaching that with our director of biblical studies, Onika Stewart. And then lastly, we're going to end out the month with a course discussion on apostleship, really focusing on the marketplace. and we're going to have Professor Cord take the lead on that. So we have some really great stuff happening. These are free webinars. If you register, you get reminder emails. You get to come into the Zoom where you can actually add your voice to the discussion, should you choose. And in addition to that, you actually get a discount code for summer classes. So come register for these webinars. We will stream them on Facebook as well. We are offering summer classes starting at the end of this month as well. These summer classes, there are about 6 of them, and they're taught by 4 out of 6 of our instructional staff. I will be teaching an Introduction to Hebrew Bible Prophets course, of which you guys got like a little crash course of on Thursday, but it's going to be much more expansive. We're going to actually read these prophetic books in the Old Testament, and we're going to think about what their messages are and how we can live into them. And I'm also going to be teaching a Bible language tools course that will help you learn how to study the Bible using online tools that are free in 4 weeks. So we're going to learn about how to do word studies and exegetical focuses and theological reflections and contextual analysis. I'm going to arm you to study your Bible better. Onika Stewart is going to be teaching the Introduction to the New Testament course, where she'll focus on the Gospels and Acts. In the fall, we'll go ahead and move on to the Pauline literature. She's also going to be teaching a 4-week course called Nurturing the Prophetic Imagination. It's going to be a great course and help you exercise that prophetic potential that we all have. Professor Brown is going to be teaching Marketplace Ministry, and you got a sneak peek as to how he teaches today. As you can see, he's very phenomenal. And then Professor El Michelle Salvant, who you will hear Monday, will be teaching a course on expanding your ministry and business using social media tools, and mostly using yourself and adequate presentations of yourself to expand and further your ministerial or business goals. So please check us out. If you're interested, please go ahead and register, or take a look at our website and register. The registration link is there. Last but not least, you guys, I promise this is it. We have 6 certificate programs, 3 advanced certificates, and 3 basic certificates, 5 to 8 courses in real time. You get to come to class, talk to professors, see them face to face, ask questions, add to the discussion, teach us and allow us to teach you. And you can do this in 3 different departments: biblical studies, where you can focus either on Old or New Testament; biblical languages, where you can focus on either Hebrew or Greek; and Christian ministry, where you can focus on whatever you want to focus on, because we want to teach classes that you are interested in, and we want to know what you want to learn, because we want to teach it. These courses they take about 6 to 12 months to complete the entire program. We do have payment options that are available that start at as little as $60 per month. And then they're flexible, taught by qualified instructions in very much an online discussion-based format. So we don't lecture. We want you to complete these courses, and we want you to complete them with your voice. Add it to the discussion. This PowerPoint's a little odd. Nonetheless, if you go to our website, Amana Bible Institute with the E.net, you can find out more information about our certificate programs and register for them there. And if you're interested in our courses, but you're having some financial concerns, please just reach out to us at amanabibleinstitute@gmail.com, and we can see what we can do. We are looking for sponsors, so if you know of people, or you have the resources to help people that you know or do not know progress and learn and grow, and you want to donate or sponsor a student for a class, please also reach out to us at amanabibleinstitute@gmail.com, and we'll gladly accept your sponsorship. And in addition to that, if you're interested in being an instructor for Amana Bible Institute, feel free to reach out to us. You can also visit our website, amanabibleinstitute.net, and click on our instructional staff page, which will lead you to our employee application portal. So I'm done boring you with all of our amazing programs. Are there any questions or comments or concerns before we conclude the discussion today? Okay, well, thank you so much for all of your feedback and for the great lesson. Thank you also to our guests. And yes, have a nice day. Hope to see you on Monday at 7 p.m. for Evangelism in the Digital Age. Have a nice day, you guys.